The New York Giants season ended in Philadelphia as they lost in the divisional round of the playoffs with a score of 38-7. Losing to an opponent in the playoffs is never fun, let alone to a division rival by 30 plus points in their stadium. And I know a lot of Giants fans are understandably upset with how their season ended, but unlike a lot of other years for the Giants, 2022 was different, and they have a lot to look forward to. The New York Giants had been to the playoffs just once in the past 11 years, and that was back in 2016, in which they lost to the Green Bay Packers in the wildcard round by 25 points. Over the past 10 years, this franchise has not been successful, and they've had a lot of coaching changes, front office changes, and everything in between. But their future is insanely bright, and there is a lot to dive into in today's video, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing some of the Giants' wins throughout the 2022 season. You could say this started last January when they made the decision to hire head coach Brian Daboll. But the first draft pick in the Brian Daboll and general manager Joe Schoen era was Oregon defensive end Kayvon Thibodeaux. KT had a very good rookie season, all things considered, and ended up third amongst all rookies in pressures with 45, behind only Aiden Hutchinson of the Lions and George Karlaftis of the Chiefs. And if you've watched any videos in the past, then you know pass rush takes longer to develop than a lot of other positions in the NFL. So when a player like Nick Bosa, Chase Young, or Micah Parsons have very good rookie seasons like they did, that's why it's a very big deal. And KT didn't have a year those guys had by any means, but he had a solid rookie year and one that showed a lot of promise for not only his future, but for the Giants' future. And having a line with him, Azeez Ojulari, Leonard Williams, and of course the big fella Dexter Lawrence, all with another year of experience underneath their belt, well, it could be a long year for opposing offensive lines in 2023, especially with the emergence of Dexter Lawrence in 2022, who quietly had 70 pressures on the year, along with 26 quarterback hits. Defensive coordinator Wink Martindale played a huge part in the defensive success, as we all know Wink is never afraid to dial up a blitz and keep quarterbacks under pressure, which he did quite often. And yes, their season ended in a very unfortunate way, and we will get to that game in a minute, but they started out 7-2, which was their best start in years, and won a playoff game. And from a talent standpoint of what was on the field in their Week 14 matchup against the Eagles and the divisional round matchup, this was a perfect example of out-talenting another team. The Giants and Eagles in 2022 were not close in talent, and it showed in 2 of the 3 games they played. The Week 18 matchup was a game played with backups, and the Eagles were trying to win the game in the safest way possible, which they successfully did. But a trio of Richie James, Darius Slayton, and Isaiah Hodgins does not compare to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. And Jalen having Dallas Goedert at tight end certainly doesn't hurt either. And for as good as Brian Daboll is as a head coach, and for how much he has maximized what his guys can do, really all year, not just for a couple of games here or a couple of games there, you cannot beat a Ferrari in a race with a Civic. The Eagles also had one of the best signings of all of free agency last year in Haason Reddick, who finished the year with 16 sacks and added a sack and a half against the Giants in the divisional round. And what stinks for the Giants, aside from the obvious, is having a rookie tackle in Evan Neal, who admittedly struggled a lot throughout 2022, go against him time after time after time. And for Neal, the postseason was not friendly to him, as in 2 games per PFF, he allowed 13 pressures and a sack. The New York Giants winning a playoff game with the roster they did in 2022 is an incredible accomplishment in itself, and even if it was against the Vikings, this is nothing short of encouraging for their future. Because if there were any questions entering this year of whether or not they would be the same old Giants, they answered them. And in the previous 3 years, or the first 3 years of the Daniel Jones era, they were 14-35 as a team with 2 4-win seasons and a lot of disappointment. And a 9-7-1 record is the start of the future of the New York Giants, because what has to be remembered for not only the divisional round game but for the 2022 season is this is a lot of former general manager Dave Gettleman's talent and a lot of his roster. And there was a reason Gettleman was fired. And some of Gettleman's notable decisions include damn near letting the entire world know they wanted to draft Alabama receiver Devontae Smith in the 2021 draft, which allowed Philly to promptly trade up in front of them to acquire a 1,000-yard receiver, and for that matter, allowing Dallas to draft Micah Parsons, while you traded back in the draft to select receiver Kadarius Toney, who is now a member of the Kansas City Chiefs. In one draft, that's about as bad of a swing as you're going to find from a what you wanted standpoint versus what you received. And the good news within this was the Bears traded up to get Justin Fields, so they did get another first-round pick out of it. But missing out on Devontae Smith and replacing him with Kadarius Toney was, well, it wasn't ideal, and the results 2 years later show exactly that. Unfortunately, this wasn't the only miss, or monumental miss, of Gettleman's career from a draft standpoint, and I'm not going to point out every single draft miss, as much as it is to acknowledge. Imagine Devontae Smith on the Giants in 2022 and how much he would have helped what was a woeful receiving core and not helped out the division rival Eagles instead. And just so we are clear here, this decision alone would not have magically made the Giants beat the Eagles, as the Giants were beat repeatedly in the trenches. But whenever people say draft day decisions affect franchises for a very long time, this is a perfect example in the Giants' case. And I know another draft day scenario under Gettleman people love to bring up is drafting Saquon Barkley at number 2, and hindsight is always 20/20, and in 2018, taking Josh Allen number 2 overall would have been egregious at the time over both Sam Darnold and Josh Rosen. And the skill talent the Giants had combined with head coaches of Pat Shurmur and Joe Judge over the past 4 years, really before Brian Daboll got here, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say Josh Allen would not be anywhere close to the Josh Allen we know today. But the Giants' 2022 draft was the first under Daboll and Shane, and the old saying is to give it a couple of years before going back and grading a class and giving teams draft grades, but I do like the Giants' 2022 class after a year. Sure, it's not the Seahawks class with Kenneth Walker, Tariq Woolen, and both starting offensive tackles, but what has to be remembered about that class specifically is, yes, that class will be talked about often and understandably so, but teams can still have very good classes that don't have to be one of the best over the past 5 or 10 years. And I think the Giants found a good pass rusher that will start for them in multiple years in Kayvon Thibodeaux, and I do like the potential of rookie tight end Daniel Bellinger moving forward. Taking a little peek into the future with their free agency and players they will re-sign this offseason, at the moment they have a ton of cap space with over $50 million, but a lot of that will go to retaining both Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. The good news for the Giants is they can clear a lot more, as in $13.5 million more, by cutting free agent bust Kenny Golladay. And I realize Giants fans may not want to immediately cut a receiver to spend money on a free agent receiver, but it's more than likely either that or to draft another receiver early and hope they pan out. They drafted Wan'Dale Robinson in the second round of the 2022 NFL Draft, and I was not the biggest fan of the Wan'Dale selection, as I would have preferred them to draft any of George Pickens, Sky Moore, or Alec Pierce. But there are interesting free agents at the receiver position, like Juju Smith-Schuster, who put together a 900-yard year and is just 26 years old. Or, for that matter, like their own free agents in Richie James and Darius Slayton. And given the situation the Giants are in at the receiver position, and given how their season went with the receivers not being great, I do not doubt the Giants getting aggressive to make a trade for a receiver that would include significant draft capital. They saw what the Eagles did in the first year with A.J. Brown and are, at minimum, headed to the NFC Championship game as I record this. And sure, not every trade would work out to that extent, but with a young quarterback like Jalen Hurts and a good receiver like A.J. Brown, it can help the team out in a big, big way. And we saw that in 2022. And throughout Daniel Jones' career, he has never had a true number one receiver. And based on what the Giants had out there this past year, I only think this can go up as they dive more into the Joe Schoen era and get further and further away from the Dave Gettleman era. And I do want to clarify one thing, as it will be a huge point of discussion this offseason for the Giants, and that's whether or not to pay Saquon Barkley. Personally, I think they will, as he is one of the best backs in the league when healthy. That is a huge thing to note with Saquon, but when the time comes, I think he will receive a 2 or 3 year extension with the Giants. And given how controversial paying a running back is, well, there's even better news for the Giants. The 2023 running back class is absolutely loaded, and they can select a back in the 4th, 5th, or 6th round if they understandably do not want to give Saquon over 300 carries again next year. And in a weird way, I think the Eagles smoking will benefit this team in the long run, because for as much as the Vikings heard they were frauds all year, while the Giants overachieved in every way imaginable as they went from the number 5 pick to a playoff win, they won a lot of games in crazy ways, and this game showed not only the Giants' weaknesses, but where they need to get better to be able to compete with the Eagles in 2023. Because you draft and acquire free agents to beat the teams in your division. I will say, for as much as I love the Giants' future and everything they did in 2022, I don't think this is a one-year rebuild or turnaround, and that this team will be in the NFC Championship game next year. They need a ton of help in the offensive line, and having a mobile quarterback in Daniel Jones, that alleviates some of the poor offensive line play they had, but it does not eliminate all of it. They also need corners, as very quietly the NFC East has become a good division of receivers, as 6 times a year they are going to have to come up with a game plan of how to stop, or at least to limit, A.J. Brown and Devontae, CeeDee Lamb, and Terry McLaurin. And I do think Jahan Dotson will soon be included in this as well. But for a roster that was nowhere near as talented as some of the others they went up against throughout the season, the Giants let everyone know what's coming in the future. The Brian Daboll era started out with an improbable win over the Titans back in Week 1, and it's easy to sit here now and say, well, it's the Titans, but it was different in early September. The Titans were the defending number 1 seed in the AFC, and the wins kept coming for the Giants, and they will continue, as the New York Giants' future is insanely bright. And that's all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it would mean the world. And until next time, as always, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.